Order. Helen Whately to move the motion.
Thank you very much. I beg to move that this House has considered rights and protections for residents of leisure park homes.
So quietly so we can listen to the next debate.
It's a pleasure to open this debate under your chairmanship, Mr Austin. If you were to visit my constituency of Faversham and Mid-Kent and drive along the A20 past Faversham and then turn up a winding single-track lane into the rolling hills of the North Downs area of outstanding natural beauty, 5 minutes later or so, you would find yourselves at Pilgrim's Retreat. This is a beautiful spot, surrounded by fields and woodlands. There's hardly another building to be seen other than the park home site of Pilgrim's Retreat. It's an ideal spot for a holiday, within easy reach of Leeds Castle and the Kent coast, and a lovely place to retire. That's the dream that a number of my constituents gave their life savings to buy into. But the reality is a long way from the rural idyll they were hoping for. Some have spent a six-figure sum on a park home that they believed they could spend the rest of their days in, only to find that they have in fact bought a holiday home. That means they do not have the same status as permanent residents and leaves them vulnerable to exploitation. Some have arrived at their new property but found they're unable to get in because there's no path or steps up to the front door. And the site owner, Fred Sines, who's a man with a record and has been mentioned in this House previously, I'm told has then demanded thousands of pounds in cash to fix the problem. I'm also told that he's hiked pitch fees overnight with little warning, and I'm told there's a culture of fear and intimidation at Pilgrim's Retreat, with people being banned from using facilities like the club room and threatened with having their property demolished. And all the while, they've been paying council tax to the local authority, even though they're not permanent residents. Mr Austin, I recognise that leisure park homes or holiday homes are a significant part of Britain's tourism industry. They're often located in beautiful rural or coastal settings and can be an important driver of the local economy when used for their true purpose of holidaying. According to a recent report by the UK Caravan and Camping Alliance, holiday homes in mobile home or caravan parks make up 8% of the UK's tourism sector, generating some 3.9 billion in visitor spend and supporting 170,000 jobs. When run in a decent and proper way, holiday parks support local economies and provide much-needed jobs in areas where work can be hard to find. Yet this is not always the case, and I believe that Pilgrim's Retreat is not a one-off. In my constituency and elsewhere, holiday homes appear to be being missold as residential homes, depriving the local area of tourist income and leaving those residents with few rights or protections, some of whom are elderly and in poor health and vulnerable to exploitation. And I've heard that the situation is compounded by a failure of local authorities to consistently enforce the terms of holiday home licences by checking whether or not people are living there all year round, which they shouldn't, or checking that they have another main address. So there are undoubtedly many wonderful holiday parks where the owners follow the rules, holidaymakers come and go in peace, and the local economy benefits. But that is not always the case. I'll happily give way.
I'm very grateful to a very strong case for why this area needs to be looked at, and just highlighting the problems that some of our constituents have experienced. But does she recognise that many of these operators are actually doing a good job providing employment to local people? I've got a number of examples. Meadowhead Limited in my constituency is doing a very good service, I believe, and it's important we don't tarnish the whole industry in the way that these particular bad examples maybe have been conducting themselves.
My honourable friend makes a very good point, and there are also well-managed park home sites in my constituency as well. And actually I think that's one of the reasons why we need to take action on where the system isn't working, to make sure that indeed the whole industry isn't tarnished by the actions of an unscrupulous minority, I believe. But there is this problem for a subset of sites, and I believe that gaps in the law and inadequate oversight by local authorities are allowing some unscrupulous site owners to benefit from a lack of consumer awareness. And to fix it, and I'll give away in a second, we need to strengthen the rights and protections for holiday homeowners, make sure that owners and potential owners know those rights, and make sure that the law is properly enforced. I will give way to my honourable friend.
I'm very grateful for my friend. She's making a very, very coherent case in favour of both sides of the argument. But would she agree that there are some cases, not many, but there are some cases where tenants are actually gaming the system and actually to the disadvantage of some of the park owners? And that actually perhaps maybe a way forward with this would be more formal legal requirements that people who are signing leases should have legal advice and therefore be bound by the contracts, properly bound by the contracts that they then sign.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention. I have heard the same thing, and I almost think he might have seen my speech in advance from the point he just made, though he hasn't, but we have clearly come to some of the same conclusions. So, as in fact, to reiterate the point, the essence of this is where the law isn't working and enforcement isn't happening, the industry overall is getting a bad name, and the consequence of that is individuals' dreams of their idyllic retirement in a country or coastal setting turns into a nightmare. One reason for this is specifically because the owners of a holiday park home, don't own the land that they live on. They're simply leasing the caravan or the mobile home on that land. And I found that people think that they're signing up for a long term, to own that property for the long term, but actually they're just signing a short-term lease. And that can be as short as 12 years. And then because they're leaseholders, they're only covered by consumer protection legislation, not a wider range of housing laws. Under the Mobile Homes Act 2013, local authorities have powers to issue notices to residential site owners to do with the residential homes when the site isn't kept in a good condition, and they can be fined up to £5,000 for failure to comply with those notices. And that Act also gives councils emergency powers to enter sites at short notice and then enforce those notices. But holiday park homes are excluded from the Act. And I've heard that the Mobile Homes Act has helped reduce exploitation on residential sites, but actually that exploitation seems to have then shifted to holiday home sites. So solving one problem appears to have created another.
On that point?
I will happily give way, yes.
Very grateful to the honourable member, and I congratulate her on getting this very timely debate. Indeed, in Scotland, there's a requirement that by May of this year, there be licences issued to the owners, whether or not it's holiday or residential, where people are residing permanently. And the purpose behind this is, of course, to give the guarantees that are lacking in the cases that she makes reference to. And I would make reference to the Scottish Confederation of Park Home Residents Associations, which is a group that's gathering together to help these people, to give them a voice both to the council where there are complaints, but actually more importantly to the site owners when they deviate from what we would all expect.
I thank the honourable member for his point. I mean, I think, and in general, we should look and learn from what is happening in all the parts of the United Kingdom. I'll refer to Wales in a moment and see what works best. And no doubt the Minister will be doing the same. And I've had conversations already with her on this issue, and I know that she's sympathetic and concerned and very much looking into it, which I appreciate, which brings me to my first question to her. And can I ask my honourable friend whether she would consider extending relevant parts of the Mobile Homes Act to holiday home owners, and whether she would consider introducing tougher penalties for the unscrupulous holiday site owners to discourage them from acting in an exploitative way, and whether she would look at the question of the fit and proper person test, which I know could be introduced in England for residential homes under the Mobile Home Act and has already been introduced in Wales. And though I know that this is not necessarily perfect, I think it could be a step in the right direction to make it harder for a known unscrupulous landlord to get a site licence. I believe that as well as some stronger rights and protections for the purchasers of holiday homes, we do need to make sure that the existing legislation is actually being enforced. My understanding is that the responsibility at the moment in England falls on local councils, and that the local council, for instance, should be checking that the holiday home owners have another primary address, so that the holiday home is not their only and main address, and should also be making sure that they are not staying there in the holiday home all year round. And it appears, at least in Maidstone, in the case of Pilgrim's Retreat, that my local borough council hasn't been doing that. So this situation has been allowed to continue, not just for months, but actually for years, building up, so that tens and potentially hundreds of people who believe their residents are being affected, even though actually, in parallel, the same local authority has been collecting council tax from these individuals as if they are permanent residents. What's also happened is that the site licence at Pilgrim's Retreat has been extended from 11 months to 12 months. So that compounds the confusion of the individuals seeking to buy these properties and live in them, giving them the impression that they can stay in these places all year round. And I don't believe that my local council is alone in doing this. Now, given this situation, the various ways in which the individuals have been let down on Pilgrim's Retreat, I welcome the fact that my local council is looking into an amnesty and trying to find ways to avoid making the residents, as they believe they are, homeless, because these properties are actually their only residence and they've spent their savings on them. But in general, the situation cannot and must not be allowed to continue. And I do think that if borough councils across the country are really struggling and failing to enforce the rules, then it would be right to look at other options for licensing and enforcing. And I would ask the Minister to look into and consider what could make enforcement look better, what changes to the rules might make it easier to enforce, or should there be other organisations or other levels at which enforcement and licensing occurs, whether it might be at county level or whether, in fact, there should be an independent regulator with statutory power to enforce. And also the question of, for making it easier, whether a change to the rules. So, for instance, when a site has a 12-month licence, even though people might be told they can't stay there all year round, it's actually really hard to enforce that they don't stay there all year round. It would be easier if a site simply closed for a period of the year, 1 or 2 months. Now, I know that's not necessarily popular with the holiday home owners, and they're trying to run a business where people might want to take a holiday at any time of the year. But there is a balance to be struck between making sure the business model works and making sure that these places are holiday homes, because if de facto they become housing developments, they are totally failing to achieve their objective for the economy. I believe we also do need stronger protections for the individuals living in those homes, as well as making sure they're properly enforced. We need to make sure that consumers know their rights. I've spoken to the British Holiday Homes and Parks Association and listened to stories from all around the country, and it really seems to be clear many people aren't alert to the risk that they might be missold a holiday home. They hear that residents are paying council tax, they know about 12-month leases. The site owners are often the only source of information for somebody purchasing. They're the only source of advice up to and including the point of sale, and I think many purchasers genuinely believe that they are buying a residential home. Give way to my honourable friend.
I just thank my honourable friend for giving way and just making some good points. Just on the issue of advice, is there not a potential role for solicitors in this process in terms of actually giving people or providing advice for some of the transactions that are involved? Because we're not talking about inconsiderable sums of money, we're talking about sometimes a lot of money for the individuals concerned who are buying these park homes. So would she, what role does she feel that solicitors, the legal process, should have in helping people to make wise decisions and understand the risks involved?
I welcome my honourable friend for this point. It's similar to the point made earlier, that I think it would be right to look at whether individuals, when they're spending this sort of sums of money, £100,000, £200,000, that they maybe should be required to get some form of legal advice. I mean, clearly you don't want to make it more onerous than buying a home, but you can't buy a bricks and mortar house without going through a conveyancing process. And perhaps if there was some requirement for some kind of more formal process, we would see fewer people falling into the trap of misunderstanding what they're buying. I think there's also a role simply on communications and whether there would be an opportunity for a communication campaign targeted at the market, at potential and current holiday park home owners to try and get the message out there to people who might well fall victims of this simply through stronger communications, because we simply need to close this mismatch between people's perceptions and the realities of buying a holiday park home. People need to understand they're not just buying the land, they're buying the lease. They need to understand that and know the implications of that. Now, Mr. Austin, looking around me, I believe there are some other colleagues who may wish to speak this afternoon, and I'm very keen to make sure that my honourable friend the Minister has time to address the questions I have raised. So I would say that, in conclusion, by strengthening legislation to give protections for holiday park home owners, ensuring proper enforcement takes place, and improving consumer awareness, I believe that we can and we must make sure that other people don't fall into the same trap as my constituents at Pilgrim's Retreat.
The question is that this House has considered rights and protections for residents of leisure park homes. Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Austin. It's always a pleasure to speak in Westminster Hall at any time, but on this issue, it's one that I have a particular interest in, because I have a leisure and park homes in my constituency, constituency of Strangford, but located at Ballyhalbert at the village. It's been there for many, many years, I want to first of all thank the Honourable Lady for Faversham and Mid-Kent for bringing it forward. I'm mindful of the last time that I spoke in Westminster Hall on this issue of park homes, leisure and park homes. The Honourable Lady for Romsey and Southampton North was not a minister, she now is, and she brought this issue forward, and her and I shared that debate in Westminster Hall at that time. And it's a pity that some years have passed by, and indeed we haven't seen maybe the conclusion that the Honourable Lady would like to see, or perhaps I would like to see as well. But I will speak on a very specific point, Mr. Austin, and it refers to some of the problems we've had in my constituency in relation to it. It won't be maybe the issues that the Honourable Lady has referred to, but it's other ones which I feel I've got the air in the chamber in Westminster Hall today, and would reflect on my time previous to this, when I was in the Northern Ireland Assembly, and the job I had before this. The Caravan Private Members Bill was brought before us, and I fully supported the rights not simply of holiday caravans, but of those who chose to live permanently on site, and there were many. It was just a burgeoning business at that time, but from the Council to the Assembly and then obviously to here. I was supportive of proper rights then, and I'm supportive of them now. And the Honourable Lady has put forward a very, very good and solid case. Very pleased to see the Minister in her place again. She seems to be in Westminster Hall almost as much as I am. That's 2 days running. I jest. In fact, back in 2015, I questioned the then Minister, Amber Rudd, regarding electricity prices for park home residents, outlining concerns about the lack of energy efficiency schemes for those living in park homes, ever mindful of the fact that the age of those living in park homes is from 55 upwards to perhaps 80, and asking the Minister to see what she could do at that time to help them, taking into account that park homes can't have electricity meters. I was just one of the many issues that I brought forward at that time. It was clear that there were indiscretions, there were difficulties, and I want to highlight some of them other ones as well. This is yet, I believe, another issue, another small issue that shows that whilst the 1983 legislation, the Mobile Homes Act 1983, gives protection, as does the Caravan Sites and Control of Development Act 1960 and Part 2 of the Consumer Rights 2015, which protects consumers from enforceability of unfair terms and contracts. Honourable Lady has referred to unfair terms and contracts, so am I. In addition, under the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations 2008, all of these pieces of legislation, and yet residents are not protected and are so unsure of their rights. And I want to air those issues. Just for the record, Mr. Austin, I think it's important that it is a devolved matter in Northern Ireland in relation, and not the Minister's responsibility to respond to all of these things. But I want to air the issues, because the problems that the Honourable Lady refers to that are happening in England, and that's why all the right honourable members are here, and probably in Scotland as well, and in Wales, are ones that are under control of the Assembly. If only we had a functioning Assembly. I've been dealing with an issue with the park homes in my constituency, and in cooperation with the local council. Things are certainly not straightforward or simple. Every battle you had with leisure or park homes, I'll tell you what, it was a battle from beginning to end. all this had to do with the removal of fences, just as an example again of the litigation and the problems that occur through that. The owners of the park home site are required to operate under a site licence issued by the council, which is displayed on site. The licence conditions reply to amenity and safety, which are based on model licence conditions issued by the Department of the Environment in 1982. I had a meeting with the local residents. Again, there's many things that happen. You have local residents who come and have problems, and there's others who need maybe some encouragement sometimes to follow the rules as are laid down.
Quite happy. Very grateful for our friend for giving way, and like he, I have many holiday parks in my constituency. I think it's important to put on record that not all perhaps are as unscrupulous as some of the examples that we've heard this afternoon. However, my honourable friend makes a very good important point about often residents and constituents come to us with problems and aren't fully aware of the rights and some of the remedies that are available to them. Would you agree with me that's something that we should be looking at to raise awareness of some of the remedies that are on offer?
I thank the honourable friend and member for his intervention, and he has said what we're all trying to achieve. The honourable lady wants to achieve that. I certainly do, and everybody else here wants the same as well. All parks are inspected annually for compliance with these model conditions, and during the annual site licensing visit to the park homes, the licence states fences must not be erected around or near the individual caravans unless they are of a non-combustible material and they do not present a safety hazard. What I feel, and I did at that time, Mr. Austin, was that many of these people had these things in place for 10, 15 odd years, and there was never a bit of bother until about 3 years ago. The problems were created. People planted their wooden palisades, they had their small trees or bushes planted, and there was an interpretation by some council staff that these were a danger. While the council has a duty to ensure compliance, the responsibility rests with the park owner. In this case, the owner had failed to ensure compliance, and to recognise the presence of such combustible materials can assist the rapid spread of fire, and by enclosing individual sites does not allow for access of emergency vehicles. So that's what the whole issue was. I'm conscious, Mr. Austin, there's a number of people who want to speak, and I'm not going to keep people back. Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Austin. Can I endorse everything?
He was giving me.
I'm grateful. It's not finished.
I'm grateful to the honourable member. Could I urge the devolved administrations, when looking at issues with residential park homes, to look at what this Parliament did in terms of the revised legislation and regulations? I had a steady stream of casework prior to that. I've not had a single piece of casework since. So in terms of the residential issues that he's talking about, I would urge them to look at what this Parliament has introduced.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. I'm just going to come to my conclusion, Mr. Austin, which you'll be glad to hear. And the reason why we have that conclusion is because we got to the end of the road and we got the problem sorted. Hallelujah for that. But it was a long time getting it round. And what we ended up with, after much deliberation and by agreement between park homes and the council, the residents have been permitted to retain the boundary fencing, as this does not assist the spread of fire from property to property, which we said it never did. Conclusion. This one issue highlights the mire that living in a park home can be, and I believe we need to have specific, clarified regulations to protect park owners, residents, and also to allow the better working relationship with local authorities. Those in park homes are typically retired and sometimes very vulnerable people, and I simply do not feel that the current quagmire of guidance and legal protection offers a protection, and this I truly believe must change. Mr. Austin, thank you.
We're going to have to call the front benches at 10 past. There are 4 people who want to speak, so I'd be grateful if people could restrict their remarks to about 4 minutes, if that's okay. And we'll start with Sir Desmond Swain.
I'll try again, Mr. Austin. Can I thank my honourable friend for raising this issue and endorse much of what she said? The holiday park homes in my constituency bring hundreds of thousands of holiday makers and their revenue to my constituency every year. They are extraordinarily well managed. They produce a very, very high quality consumer product, and there is a huge amount of reinvestment to keep that product at its standard every year. I'm always aware of the problems that I have had in the past with park homes, but they are largely, and in fact exclusively, confined to the residential homes in my constituency. The park home, the holiday homes, frankly, I've never had any difficulty with. They're all extremely reputable organisations. With respect to the residential homes, By and large, again, I've had little difficulty, particularly when they're operated by public limited companies, that you have someone that you can deal with. There are, however, a number of homes, and I'm struggling to find the delicate words to use, if I can put it this way, Mr. Austin, run by people who have neither the social nor managerial skills to make a success of it. And the difficulty is actually being able to contact anyone at some of these park homes. And that's where I think we need to come to some better form of intervention. Now, I know that the question of fit and proper person has been raised, and I think that is an appropriate one. One of the issues that many of the residents raise with me in the residential homes is the issue of the 10% selling on fee. It's extraordinary to me that people enter into contractual arrangements without advice and without realising what they're letting themselves in for. But nevertheless, if that is to be addressed, I think we have to recognise realistically that is part of the economics of running a park home. And therefore you would expect that revenue to be paid for elsewhere in your site fees. Where I do think there's an argument for dealing directly with the 10% fee is for those park home owners who are of the nature that I have just described. There is always an incentive for them to increase the turnover of sales by making vulnerable people's lives miserable so that they move on. And that is a clear argument for addressing the 10% to remove that incentive.
Well done. Gillian Keegan.
Chair, and thank very much to my honourable friend from Faversham and Mid-Kent for raising this important issue, which does, I think, affect a lot of us here. And I've visited both residential and leisure park homes in my constituency, and under the correct management, there is no doubt that they can be well-run sites, great places to live or go on holiday. However, some of them are in the wrong hands, and bad practice can creep in at leisure sites, and they're creating an exploitative way of doing business, in my view. And the lack of regulation certainly is making this situation worse. During my visit to a leisure park site in my constituency, I heard accounts from many constituents of maintenance disputes and intimidation and harassment by site management and changing the rules. So one day you could have an outdoor shed and then you couldn't the next day, or you could have plant pots and then suddenly you could only have 3 plant pots, and all the rest were smashed. And they were quite threatening, and the residents were definitely frightened. So even more concerning were the reports about mis-selling of leisure homes as permanent accommodation and unclear contractual arrangements on reselling and pitch fees. Many stories people have been sold a dream of selling up, buying a holiday home with the emphasis on the site being open for most of the year. I was even handed photographic evidence of signage showing it was an ideal starter home and encouraging people to come and move into these starter homes. And in places like Chichester, where the average house price is over £300,000, that is an attractive offer for many. And of course, all they think is they have to go on holiday for 2 weeks, but most of us do. Also, many of the residents were only given part 1 of their licence agreement during the sales process, with part 2, the terms and conditions, all being made available after the sale, or in some cases never supplied. And one gentleman I spoke with explained that he'd signed his contract despite not seeing all the small print, because after divorcing, he just needed to find somewhere to live really quickly. So from those examples and those shared by members here today, it's evident that there's a widespread problem of holiday park sites being used residentially with owners not adequately protected under consumers' rights legislation. And of course, local authorities do have enforcement powers, but you know, they are concerned about using them because they know that this is going on, and they're concerned about creating a problem that they can't solve because there are not enough homes if people are made homeless. And of course, the National Caravan Council, if they're a member, can also be used to raise concerns. However, not all are members, and in some cases, one park home I recently visited, one site, they had left the NCC, so there was no cause for redress. So where the owners are guilty of mis-selling, the balance of power is completely in their favour. And residents have no permanent address, no local connection to the area possibly before, and that can lead to problems registering on the electoral roll, accessing local services or receiving benefits that they need. And residents are often too scared to come forward with complaints because they are all too aware of their vulnerable position. They're almost stateless in a way. You know, they don't have any rights. And essentially, they are fearful of being evicted and made homeless. Consumer rights legislation does not offer these grey area residents the same level of statutory protection, such as against harassment or rights over information such as utility charges, that those living on the residential sites or in ordinary homes do have. So I fully support the calls we've heard from the Mobile Homes Act 1983 to be extended to leisure homeowners, and which will go a long way, I hope, to even up the imbalance and protect the many vulnerable and often elderly residents. Thank you.
Peter Aldous.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dawson. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Faversham and Mid-Kent, for securing this debate and for highlighting a growing problem in the leisure park sector. This is devastating the lives of many people, turning what was supposed to be a dream into a nightmare. The matter is of interest to me for two reasons. Firstly, the Mobile Homes Act 2013, which was brought in to stamp out abuse in the park homes sector, started off as a private member's bill, which I took through the Commons. It would appear that the measures introduced in that act to outlaw rogue site owners have had an unintended consequence of them now focusing their attention on holiday parks. Secondly, the holiday park sector is very important in my constituency. Leisure park homes are a vital component part of the tourism industry around Lowestoft and along the Suffolk and the Norfolk coast. Generally, these businesses are very well run, and it is important to have in mind that the vast majority of site owners are responsible business people. As I see it, the issues to be addressed are those unscrupulous operators who've moved into the sector and some people who have moved onto the parks with the intention of living there rather than holidaying there. I would suggest, Mr. Austin, this can be addressed in two ways. Firstly, there is a whole raft of existing legislation which prohibits mis-selling and fraud, which should be enforced. This includes the Consumer Contracts Information Cancellation and Additional Charges Regulations of 2013, the Consumer Rights Act of 2015, the Misrepresentations Act of 1967, the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations of 2008, and probably very importantly, the Fraud Act of 2006. Secondly, responsible site owners should do all that they can to ensure that people do not live on parks as their main homes. This means properly checking the purchaser's home address and asking for a utility bill and a council tax receipt to confirm it. It means watching out for telltale signs that the mobile home might be being used as a permanent home, such as cars leaving and returning at what could be described as commuter times, and washing being on the line throughout the year, in particular school uniforms being hung out to dry. My concern about additional legislation is that there would be a need to ensure that this would not have an unintended negative impact on local economies, many of which are in coastal locations, and they're fragile and heavily reliant on tourism. Moreover, it does have to be pointed out that in many instances, local authorities do not enforce the existing laws and regulations due to financial restrictions and staff shortages. Thus, I have to ask, what is the point of passing new laws that then won't be enforced? Mr. Austin, we need to get these councils a better local government funding settlement at the forthcoming comprehensive spending review so that they can properly regulate the sector, applying the existing rules so as to drive out the rogues who are now making many people's lives a misery. My honourable friend has highlighted a growing problem that needs and must be stamped out, and I will work with her to do this. Thank you.
James Heapy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Austin. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I also congratulate my honourable friend for securing this debate. It is an issue that has arisen on a number of occasions in my constituency and on which I've conducted casework on behalf of people on all sides of the equation. Mr. Austin, before I get into that, though, may I just use this opportunity to pay tribute to the emergency services in Somerset that responded so well to the ceiling that collapsed at Pontins in Breen the other night. There are a number of people who were injured, and I hear that the emergency services responded with their usual professionalism and expertise and made sure that injury and inconvenience was absolutely minimised. Breen is a wonderful place to go for a holiday. Tens of thousands of people do every week, all season long, and there are many more caravans and mobile homes in the wider Burnham-on-Sea area. In fact, I understand that second only to Skegness in the European rankings for concentrations of caravans, and we're very proud of that indeed.
I feel like I should mention that he's completely correct, that Skegness is the proud owner of the highest concentration in Europe. And I would say that while I envy my honourable friend, the member for Faversham, for securing this debate, it is important in the context of this debate that the overall benefit to the economy of that industry is enormous, and that the rogues are small in number, even if their effects are genuinely profound.
The honourable gentleman and my friend from Boston is exactly right. He knows, as I do, that what Breen lacks in quantity against Skegness, we make up for in quality. And I know he agrees with that. Now, Mr. Austin, there are effectively four groups that are affected by this. The local community, beyond the park itself, are frustrated that there is additional pressure on local services and infrastructure without any due planning process having been followed. When the council, as Sedgemoor District Council, have had to do, they sort of retrospectively allow planning permission to protect the value of the asset that the people have, that the residents, these park owners, have spent their money on. There's therefore a lack of consultation and transparency in the planning process when that emergency measure is taken. And there's a loss of tourism revenue because permanent residents tend not to eat out and use local attractions as much as those who are visiting just for a week. So the local community is disadvantaged. Those who are sort of reputable, law-abiding caravan parks, leisure parks in the area, miss out. There is the reputational risk to their industry that they all get tarred with the same brush, and that is unfair. And there is the reality, as happened in Sedgemoor, when this became a thing 2 or 3 years ago, Sedgemoor employed a company called Capacity Grid, who I'm sure did nothing other than what they were invited to do, but their method of checking that all of the other tens of thousands of caravans in the Breen area were legit was to go round and be quite harassing in the way that they did their business and the way that they wanted proof of another address. So the council, so the park owners had to put up with their residents being affected by that company who had been instructed by Sedgemoor to go in and check on the scale of the problem. Then there's the local council themselves who have to pay for the enforcement out of our council taxes. They have the grumpiness that comes with the difficult planning decisions that they need to take if retrospectively approving that these places can be permanent places of residence. There's the fact that they're there and therefore there's no community infrastructure levy or 106 money or anything that would come with a more routine planning decision. And therefore there's none of the incumbent, the associated development that comes with having secured that with that money during the planning process. And then, most importantly of all, there is the residents themselves who are so often taken for a ride, and they're overly trusting, but they see an opportunity to have a permanent home somewhere that they have enjoyed holidaying for their entire working life, and they take that opportunity, they put their life savings into it, only to find that what they've bought is effectively worthless because there's no planning permission for that residence to be used year-round. They struggle to access local services. I've had that problem reported to me, and they are at the mercy of unscrupulous park owners. I agree so much with the expertise that's been shared with us over what could be done. There is plenty of existing legislation that protects consumer rights, and of course our first instinct should be to use what's on the statute book rather than to develop new laws. However, it is important that we do address this because just from my own experience in nearly 4 years as the MP for Wales, I have seen enough of this out on the coast to know that it is a problem that government should address, and I look forward very much to hearing what the Minister has to say about it in her concluding remarks.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and I want to begin by thanking the Honourable Lady from Faversham and Mid-Kent for bringing this debate forward, and also want to begin, if I may, Mr Chair, by being very clear for anybody who may be watching about the distinction between leisure park homes and residential park homes, because this distinction is extremely important. The terms are not interchangeable, and I hear and I completely agree with the concerns raised about leisure park homes raised by the Honourable Member for Faversham and Mid-Kent and others. And we know that these leisure homes can be bought by unsuspecting people in the mistaken belief that they can live in these homes all year round, when in actual fact this would be a clear breach of licensing conditions for holiday homes. For those who have purchased a leisure park home, they must have a permanent residential address elsewhere, as these homes cannot be used as a main residence, and this can impact on matters such as council tax, planning permission requirements, etc., as the Honourable Member for Chichester indicated. Permanent residential park homes, of which I have a couple in my constituency, are not the same, as owners can live in these houses full-time, all year round, but the regulation of these sites is a matter for the Scottish Government. But it is clear that the terms and conditions attached to these different kinds of parks, leisure parks and permanent residential park homes, need to be made absolutely clear to prospective buyers, because clearly we're hearing today that that isn't always the case. But the situation is complex. In Scotland, for permanent residential homes, I have heard of situations where parks are not being properly maintained, despite quite significant charges levied on residents for this very purpose. In response, the Scottish Government has introduced a new licensing system which gives local authorities enforcement powers it had not enjoyed before, which means it can serve improvement notices if the site owner breaches a licence condition, which is a criminal offence. In addition, the local authority can carry out steps in an improvement notice if the site owner defaults, or penalty notices can be served, and the local authority will be able to apply to the sheriff for the appointment of an interim manager. And furthermore, emergency action can be taken if there is imminent risk of serious harm to the health and safety of a person. And this represents a significant beefing up of local authority powers, and is in response to site managers or owners simply collecting money and not fulfilling their obligations to the residents to keep sites maintained to the standard that those with park homes are entitled to expect. And where gaps in the law do exist in leisure park homes, these should be addressed, as the Honourable Member for Chichester pointed out. But another issue relating to permanent sites, about which owners are simply not aware of in every case until they reach the point of resale, is that permanent residential park home owners have to pay sales commissions of up to 10% on the resale of their park home, as the member for New Forest West pointed out to us. And the question that we have to ask is, if residents don't know about this charge, why don't they know about this charge? Clearly, the system is not working as it should, as we would wish it to, and it's a situation. The situation pointed out by the Honourable Member for Strangford about the power supply to these homes is also an area of concern. I think we're really short of time. I think the Chair would like me to proceed, but I do apologise. But in Scotland, we would hope that to counter some of these difficulties, that all prospective mobile home buyers will now have 28 days' notice to consider the terms of the agreement before the sale can be concluded. And it's very important that this group of consumers have the proper protection that they need when choosing to live year-round on licensed permanent mobile home sites, because this is a very expensive undertaking, and it's very important that the system is transparent, open and fair to both permanent residential site owners and those who choose to live on these sites. And I would say to the Minister, and other people have said it before me, that all the protections that are required to make the system of purchasing leisure or residential homes, and what the rights and responsibilities are of each party involved, need to be fair for all concerned and transparent. And these measures need to be in place. And I think it is, as I always say on these debates about devolved matters, I think it's really important that England looks to see what Scotland has done, to see what can be learned, and vice versa. Because I think we should all be pursuing best practice, no matter where in the UK we live.
Sarah Jones.
Thank you, Mr Austin. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And it's a pleasure to be here in this debate. The Honourable Member for Faversham and Miss Mid-Kent made a convincing case, I think, for the need for protection of for residents of leisure park homes. She also painted a lovely picture of her own constituency, and is it any wonder that people would want to go to the rolling hills of the North Downs and indeed retire there, and what a terrible thing it is that they find, you know, that it is not quite what they expected. We heard tales of pitch fees increasing, we heard about the culture of fear, and we heard about selling. The member for Strangford, asked quite rightly, who are some of these people who are running some of these homes and what can be done about it. The member for New Forest West, the member for Strangford asked why nothing had been done for some years. He's been raising these issues. The member for Chichester talked about people feeling almost stateless, which I think is quite a strong and quite an apt word. And the member for Waveney talked about his role in previous legislation, and a really important point about the need to protect the tourism industry, and anything that we do needs to make sure we don't do anything to damage that. And the member for Wells told us that he is second only to Skegness in terms of the quantity of concentration of caravans, so we must listen to what he has to say, for I'm sure he understands. Yes.
I wasn't here earlier, but there were some distractions going on in the other chamber. But would you agree with me that it's incredibly important to draw a distinction between those sites that are badly run, badly managed, where bad practices are endemic, and those really well-run sites where there has been zero complaints over many years? For example, Pinewoods in my constituency near Wells next to the sea, Searles Park in Hunstanton, and McDonald's Caravan Park. We have a number of really well-run sites where there hasn't been any history of complaints whatsoever. So we need to find a way of making sure that we drill down and protect those people who need the protection, but not damage those well-run sites.
I agree with that completely. I think it is the poor form that tarnishes the whole industry, and people who are doing things well do not, on the whole, object to changes to regulations or legislation because they're already doing what they should. So I think he makes a good point. So as we've heard today, there are lots of problems that we need to try and fix, and they aren't afforded. People who are residents in leisure park homes aren't afforded the limited protections of mobile homeowners on sites with residential planning permission. They don't have the special protections under the Mobile Homes Act, as we talked about. And I think it's right, in our view on this side, to call for protections to be extended to residents living permanently in leisure park homes. We should also be asking why residents are being sold permanent homes in leisure parks which do not have residential planning permission, and it's unclear how widespread that practice is, and perhaps the Minister can give us her sense of the scale of this problem and what potentially they see as the issues. The Honourable Member for Faversham and Mid-Kent talked about the protections afforded to residents of park homes through the Mobile Homes Act, but it's worth emphasising that abuses are still happening across all park homes despite the law changes in 2013, and there is a need for wider reform. Organisations like the Park Home Owners Justice Campaign and the Park Homes Policy Forum have worked for years to expose the exploitation of park homes residents, which is still ongoing. Park homes have been described to me as like leasehold bullying, but with criminal thuggery thrown in. Mr Austin, we know that 62% of leasehold homeowners feel they were missold. I wouldn't be surprised if a similar or higher number of park home residents felt the same. Just like leaseholders with onerous ground rents, park home owners can be charged extortionate pitch fees, which can increase rapidly each year. Just like leasehold, hidden clauses in park home contracts can cause significant hardship down the line. Just like leasehold, residents have limited route to redress when things go wrong, and just like leasehold, any enforcement which does happen is often affected by a lack of transparency and opaque structures. But unlike most leaseholders, park home owners also report, as we've heard, being experiencing or being threatened with violence and other illegal activity. And we saw this most prominently with the disgraceful treatment of Sonia McCall, who's a leading campaigner for park homes reform. After campaigning for action on rogue park owners, Sonia had to sell her park home and move due to death threats. She then, astonishingly, had her entire home stolen while waiting for it to be delivered to her new site. She was given an OBE for services to society, but I think society has let her down. I asked her what she would like to raise with the Minister, and she asked in particular when the RPI increase to the pitch fee is going to change to CPI, and she asked about when independent research on the 10% commission payable to site owners on the sale of a resident's property is going to take place, and she said she was happy to share the Minister's response with her 30,000 residents on her database list. I am aware of the time, and I want to give the Minister time to respond. I would just say that the government has recognised that there are some systematic problems with park homes and promised to legislate on areas like pitch-free fee reviews. But crucially, they haven't legislated yet, and they have been promising for some time to get a grip of the wider leasehold scandal, and we haven't seen any primary legislation on that. And crucially, stronger laws are worthless if they are not enforced, and I'm sure the Minister will talk about the duties of local authorities, but the government's own analysis recently admitted that the 2013 powers around licensing and inspection are not being applied due to a lack of dedicated resource in councils, which is not really a surprise given the billions of pounds of cuts that we've seen under this government to local authorities. So I hope the Minister can outline when her department will be putting forward the legislation they promised back in October, and how she will support councils who are strapped for funds to enforce this. Mr Austin, just to conclude, the Conservative Party talks about being the party of home ownership, but here we are again talking about homeowners being exploited. Here we are again hearing about mis-selling and exploitative contract terms, and here we are again talking about excessive fees and commissions charged to residents who were told they were buying a home with all the rights and freedoms that affords. This is the third time today, Mr Austin, that the government has been challenged by a member of its own party over the treatment of homeowners under this government's watch. So I look forward very much to hearing when the Minister will act, as they quite rightly have promised that they will. Thank you.
Minister.
Mr Austin, it's an absolute pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today, and I congratulate my honourable friend for Faversham and Mid-Kent for securing a debate on this important issue, and to the 15 contributors that we've had today. Superb debate. I commend the honourable lady for her tireless work on rights and protections for holiday caravan owners, and the esteemed contributions we've had today from people who really know their stuff. It's been a great debate. Last year, my honourable friend brought a number of concerns to my attention about some terrible issues faced by some owners of holiday caravans on a mixed-use caravan site in her constituency. My honourable friend and I have had fruitful discussions since then to better understand the issues. Some of these issues fall to the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and I'd like to extend my thanks to Kelly Tolhurst, Minister for Small Business, Consumer and Corporate Responsibility, for her interest in this matter. We've already had discussions and agreed a number of actions for both departments, and we hope to update my honourable friend on these actions in the coming weeks. A number of important issues have been raised today about the rights of holiday caravan owners and some of the challenges they face. The government has already introduced significant protections for holiday caravan owners, and so also on planning permission issues, they should be granted for part of a site to be used for holiday purposes or other parts for residential purposes. These are mixed sites, mixed-use sites, and I understand that some of my honourable friends' concerns relate to such a site. So the discussion today, sadly, does not include the information that Sonia was after, because we're talking about holiday sites today. So those who do live permanently on the residential part of the site would have protections under the Mobile Homes Act of 1983, but as we've already heard, this does not extend to the holiday caravan owners on the site. The local authority will also issue a site licence once a planning permission has been granted. But before I talk about site licensing, I'd also like to address some of the queries my honourable friend has raised about the rights of holiday caravan owners. We know, as my honourable friend has highlighted, that some holiday caravan owners end up living permanently on their holiday sites. And the reason why this happens are complex. Some consumers see holiday caravans as a cheaper option, as my honourable friend for Chichester mentioned about first-time buyers, quite disgraceful. This may be done without seeking legal advice, which obviously should not happen. Some holiday caravan owners also end up living permanently on holiday site because they are missold their holiday caravan by a rogue site owner who presents it as being suitable for residential use. This can put huge financial pressure on these holiday caravan owners, and I do understand why suggestions have been made to extend the protections under the Mobile Homes Act 1983 to them to tackle the problem. As I've said, the mobile homes legislation, which sets out the contractual relationship between a site owner and a resident, only applies to those sites with planning permission for residential use. To apply the mobile homes legislation to all caravan owners would mean this kind of accommodation would no longer be available in the tourism sector. And it is important, as we've heard today, both from Wells and from Boston and Skegness, how important it is, and indeed from New Forest West, to protect the holiday sector and the many benefits it provides. As I've mentioned, the government has already put in place significant protections for holiday caravan owners under consumer legislation. What is required is to ensure that prospective purchasers of holiday caravans are aware of their rights and responsibilities available under consumer law. The rules, which are designed to protect individual buyers from unfair commercial practices, are set out in the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations 2008, and breaches are a criminal offence. In 2014, the rules were supplemented to provide a private right of redress for consumers who have been victims of misleading commercial practices, such as presenting a holiday caravan as a permanent residence, or by hiding or providing information in an unclear, ambiguous, or untimely way. Very briefly, dear boy.
Just to say one thing, Minister, the issue of depreciation of properties, when they buy them, within a year or 2 years, the depreciation goes down massively. Sometimes those who purchase don't know that. They need to be assured of that at an early stage.
My honourable friend from Strangford, as ever, brings luminosity to the problem. As my honourable friend for Faversham and Mid-Kent already know, enforcement legislation is the responsibility of the local authority trading standards service, and there are already strong penalties on mis-selling, with either misleading advice or omitting material information, which is an offence, a criminal offence. On summary conviction, they may be fined up to the statutory maximum or face imprisonment for up to 2 years. And indeed, my honourable friend, my friend from Whately and Wells also alluded to that. Yeah.
I'm very much aware of the mis-selling legislation, but I'm sure she is aware that some of the residents are truly fearful of going down that route because they think that they are so vulnerable and they may lose their homes.
Indeed, my honourable friend makes a very good point, and towards the end of my brief speech, I will answer her as best as I can. So other measures that I know honourable members in this debate and elsewhere are very interested in is the fit and proper person test. So, Mr Austin, we've also heard cases of harassment and intimidation of holiday caravan owners too. And harassment is both a criminal and a civil offence. And so I'd advise anyone being harassed to immediately contact the police. I want to expand on the site licensing requirements for caravan sites, which I mentioned earlier in relation to the fit and proper person test. Under the Caravan Sites and Control and Development Act 1960, all caravan sites in England, unless exempted, are required to have a site licence in addition to planning permission. The purpose of licensing is to ensure that sites are safe for residents and other users of the site. So the Mobile Homes Act 2013, amended 2016 Act, 60 Act, also introduced a new local authority site licensing regime. This regime applies to all relevant protected sites. So this includes sites with planning permission for residential use only and sites with planning permission for both holiday and residential use. So that is to say, mixed sites. Local authorities' powers include the ability to issue compliance notices if a site owner breaches their site licence conditions, and if they fail to comply with a notice, the local authority can prosecute them. If convicted, the site owner will face an unlimited fine. The 2013 Act also made provision for fit and proper person test for site owners and managers of all relevant protected sites to be introduced. This means the site owners and managers of mixed sites will be required to have a fit and proper person test, and I know members will be pleased to learn that we'll be publishing a technical consultation in the summer, and then we will legislate to introduce the scheme when parliamentary time allows. In conclusion, Mr Austin, the issues we've discussed here today are very complex, but I want to reassure you that the government is committed to improving the sector. We've already introduced important legislation to strengthen the rights of consumers. We know that there is more work to be done, and I will continue to work with Minister Kelly Tolhurst to consider what other measures can be taken on consumer protection to raise awareness for consumers' rights when purchasing holiday caravans and for traders and their legal obligations. and I will arrange a further meeting with my honourable friend to provide her with an update on the actions I have set out to undertake. And I would like to once again congratulate my honourable friend for this debate on this hugely important matter. And Mr Austin, it's a pleasure to be in the Westminster Hall again.
Thank you very much. Helen Whately to wind up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Austin. Can I just thank all honourable members who have contributed to this debate, which I feel has been, I hope, a very balanced conversation, making quite clear that the vast majority of operators of holiday home sites are doing so in an absolutely appropriate and thoughtful way, looking after the users of their park homes. But we do need to crack down on the unscrupulous owners and do something about this.
Sitting stands adjourned. Thank you.